The neon lights of Murphy's Diner flickered against the rain-soaked asphalt as 12 Harley-Davidsons rumbled into the parking lot. Jake Reaper Morrison killed his engine and removed his helmet, revealing scars that told stories most people didn't want to hear. Leader of the Hell Angeles, he'd built his reputation on fear and violence for 15 years. That's when she appeared. A tiny girl, maybe 7 years old, with matted hair and clothes 3 sizes too big. She walked straight up to the most dangerous man in 3 counties and whispered, "Do you have anything to eat? It's my birthday." What Jake didn't know was that this moment would shatter everything he thought he knew about himself. You see, beneath the leather jacket and gang tattoos lived a man who'd been running from his past as a father, the daughter he'd lost in a custody battle that destroyed his world. The bikers fell silent, the rain stopped, and in that moment something shifted in the universe. But what Jake did next shocked everyone, including himself. Would this broken little girl become the key to unlocking the man he used to be? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jake stared down at the girl, his weathered hands frozen on his helmet. Behind him, his crew watched with the intensity of predators sensing weakness. In their world, showing anything resembling compassion was a death sentence to respect. Bones cracked his knuckles, steel spat tobacco juice into a puddle. The tension was thick enough to cut. The girl's eyes were the color of storm clouds, wide and trusting in a way that made Jake's chest tighten. She couldn't weigh more than 60 pounds soaking wet, which she nearly was from the drizzle that had started up again. Her sneakers had holes that let in the cold October night. "It's my birthday," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm 8 now." 8, the same age Emma had been when the judge handed down his verdict. When his ex-wife's lawyer painted him as an unfit father, a dangerous criminal who had no business raising a child. The same age Emma had been when she stopped taking his calls, stopped writing him back, stopped being his little girl. "Where are your parents, kid?" The words came out rougher than he intended. She pointed toward the darkness beyond the diner's glow. "Mama's sleeping in the car. She's been sleeping for 2 days. I got real hungry." Jake's blood turned to ice. Sleeping for 2 days. Christ, which car? She led him 20 yards to a rusted Honda Civic parked beneath a broken streetlight. Through the driver's side window, Jake could see a woman slumped over the steering wheel, her skin the wrong color. The sweet, sickly smell that escaped when he opened the door confirmed what he already knew. The girl tugged at his leather jacket. "Is Mama gonna wake up? She promised we'd get cake today." Jake had seen death in every ugly form it could take. He delivered it himself more times than he cared to count. But this innocent child standing beside her mother's body, still believing in birthday cakes and promises, this was different. He knelt down to her level, his knees protesting against the wet pavement. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lucy Chen." "Well, Lucy Chen, I think your mama is very sick. We need to get you somewhere warm and get you that birthday dinner." Behind them, his crew had followed at a distance. 12 of the hardest men in the city, watching their leader talk gently to a homeless child. Viper shook his head in disgust. Tank muttered something about going soft, but Jake didn't care. For the first time in 15 years, something mattered more than their respect. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911, keeping his voice low as he reported the situation. Then he stood and faced his men. "Take the bikes back to the clubhouse," he ordered. "I'll catch up later." "Boss!" Viper stepped forward, his voice a warning. "What the hell are you doing? What needs to be done? She ain't your problem. Call child services and let's go. We got business tonight." Jake's hand moved to the knife on his belt, a gesture his crew knew well. "I said go. Anyone got a problem with that?" Silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Finally, Viper spat and mounted his bike. One by one, the others followed suit. 11 Harleys roared to life and disappeared into the night, leaving Jake alone with Lucy and her dead mother. Lucy's small hand slipped into his.
Are you my friend now?
Jake looked down at her trusting face and felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been locked away since the day he lost Emma. Maybe this was his chance. Maybe this broken little girl was his shot at redemption. Yeah, kid, I'm your friend. The social workers would arrive soon. Questions would be asked. But right now, this child needed food, warmth, and someone who gave a damn. Right now, she needed him to remember who he used to be. The leather-clad giant stared down at the tiny girl, his weathered face a mask of confusion and something else, something he hadn't felt in 3 years. The other bikers had gone silent, their conversations dying mid-sentence as they watched their leader, Marcus Steele Rodriguez, frozen in place by a child who couldn't weigh more than 40 pounds soaking wet. "What did you say?" His voice came out rougher than intended, like gravel scraping against concrete. The girl's chin trembled, but she held his gaze with startling determination. "It's my birthday. I'm 7 now." She paused, swallowing hard. "My mama said sometimes angels come when you need them most. Are you an angel?" A bitter laugh escaped Marcus before he could stop it. Angel. If she only knew the blood on his hands, the lives he'd destroyed, the family he'd failed to protect. He was about to turn away when she swayed on her feet, catching herself against his bike. "When did you last eat, kid?" "Yesterday, I think." Her words were barely a whisper. There was some bread in the dumpster behind the grocery store. The admission hit him like a physical blow. Behind him, he heard Tommy curse under his breath, and Jake's chair scrape against concrete as he stood up. These men, killers, drug dealers, thieves, they had rules. And hurting kids wasn't just against those rules, it was against everything they'd once believed in before the world had beaten the humanity out of them. Marcus crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level. Up close, he could see the dirt caked under her fingernails, the way her clothes hung loose on her skeletal frame, the hope in her eyes that was so bright it hurt to look at. "What's your name?" "Sophia." She smiled then, and it was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. Sophia Marie Castellanos. The name sucker-punched him. Marie, his daughter's middle name, the daughter who would have been 8 next month if the drunk driver hadn't stolen her away, along with his wife and his reason for living. The daughter whose birthday present still sat wrapped in his closet, because he couldn't bear to throw them away. "Where's your mama, Sophia?" The little girl's face crumpled. "She got sick, real sick. The medicine man said he couldn't help anymore and told us to go home. But we don't have a home. Mama's been sleeping a lot and she's really hot and I can't wake her up good." Ice shot through Marcus's veins. "Where is she now?" "Under the bridge, the one with the pretty paintings." Sophia pointed east toward the overpass where a local artist had painted a mural years ago. It had become a gathering place for the homeless, a concrete shelter from the rain and wind. Marcus stood abruptly, his mind racing. Around him, his crew watched with barely concealed tension. They'd followed him through hell and back, but this was uncharted territory. Steele Rodriguez didn't do rescue missions. He didn't save people. He destroyed them. But looking down at this child, this brave, desperate little girl who'd approached the most dangerous men in the city because she had nowhere else to turn, something cracked open in his chest, something he'd thought was dead and buried with his family. "Tommy," his lieutenant stepped forward immediately. "Get the first aid kit from the clubhouse. Jake, grab some food from the kitchen. Real food, not that processed garbage." He turned to Diesel, the club's enforcer, who looked like he could bench press a small car. "Bring the van around." "Steele, what the hell are you doing?" Tommy's voice carried a warning. They all knew what happened when their president made impulsive decisions. People died, usually the wrong people. Marcus ignored the question, focusing instead on Sophia, who was watching the exchange with wide, uncomprehending eyes. He knelt down again and carefully picked her up. She weighed nothing, all sharp angles and fragile bones. When she instinctively wrapped her thin arms around his neck, trusting him completely despite every reason not to, he had to close his eyes against the pain that threatened to buckle his knees. "We're going to go see your mama, okay? And we're going to help her feel better." "Really?" Hope blazed in her voice. You can do that? Marcus met the concerned gazes of his men over her head. They were criminals, not miracle workers. They dealt in violence and fear, not healing and hope. But sometimes the only way forward was to fake it until you figured out how to make it real. Yeah, sweetheart. We're going to try. As Diesel pulled up in the van, the others gathered supplies with military efficiency. Marcus held Sophia close and made a silent promise to whatever God might still be listening. This kid had asked him to be an angel, and even if it killed him, he was going to find a way to grow some wings. The silence stretched between them like a wire about to snap. Marcus studied the girl's face, searching for any sign of deception, but found only raw honesty in her dark eyes. 7 years old and asking strangers for food, the thought made his chest tighten in ways he'd forgotten were possible. "What's your name, kid?" he asked, his voice gentler than it had been in months. "Lily," she whispered, then added with sudden urgency, "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers, but you're the only ones here, and I'm really hungry." Behind him, Marcus heard Razor shift uncomfortably. The rest of the serpents remained frozen, watching this bizarre scene unfold. They dealt in violence, drugs, and intimidation, not lost children with empty stomachs. Marcus glanced back at his crew. Snake's perpetual sneer had vanished, replaced by something resembling concern. Even Diesel, who'd done time for assault, looked uncomfortable. The sight of genuine innocence had a way of stripping away the armor they'd all built around themselves. "Where are your parents, Lily?" Marcus crouched down to her eye level, noting how she instinctively stepped back but didn't run. "Mama's sleeping." Her small fingers twisted in the fabric of her torn dress. "She sleeps a lot now, sometimes for whole days." Marcus felt his jaw clench. He'd seen enough addicts to recognize the signs. A mother deep in the grip of whatever poison was currently flooding the streets, leaving her daughter to fend for herself. His mind flashed to his own daughter's face, and he had to force the image away before it consumed him. "When did you last eat?" The question came out rougher than he intended. Lily's brow furrowed in concentration. "Yesterday morning, I think. Mama gave me crackers." She paused, then added hopefully, "Do you have crackers?" "Jesus Christ," Razor muttered under his breath. Marcus stood slowly, his mind racing. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away. Getting involved meant complications, questions, authorities poking around. The serpents couldn't afford that kind of attention. But looking down at Lily's upturned face, he saw another child entirely. Blonde hair instead of brown, green eyes instead of dark, but the same trusting expression his Emma had worn. "Tommy," he called to the youngest member of their crew, a kid barely out of high school who'd joined after his older brother died in a rival gang shooting. "Run to that deli on 5th Street. Get sandwiches, milk, whatever they got for kids." Tommy blinked in surprise. "Boss, you heard me. Move." As Tommy jogged away, Marcus turned back to Lily. She was staring at him with a mixture of hope and disbelief that cut through his defenses like a knife. "You're really gonna get me food?" she asked. "Yeah, kid. I'm really gonna get you food." The minutes that followed felt surreal. The serpents, men who'd collectively spent decades in prison and inspired fear throughout the city's east side, stood guard around one small girl as she sat on the curb, swinging her legs nervously. Snake kept glancing up and down the street as if expecting someone to jump out and accuse them of going soft. Diesel paced like a caged animal, clearly out of his element. When Tommy returned with a bag full of food, Lily's eyes went wide. She accepted the turkey sandwich with reverent hands, as if it were made of gold instead of meat and bread. The first bite made her close her eyes and hum with satisfaction, and Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. "Slow down," he warned gently as she devoured the sandwich. "You'll make yourself sick." She nodded, but didn't slow her pace much. Between bites, she chattered about things only a 7-year-old would find important. A stray cat she'd been trying to befriend, the pretty flowers growing through the fence behind her building, how the lady at the corner store sometimes gave her day-old donuts. With each word, Marcus felt himself being pulled into a world he'd thought was lost to him forever. The world where someone's happiness could hinge on such simple things, where hope existed despite circumstances that should have crushed it long ago. "I should go home," Lily said finally, having finished the sandwich and drunk half a carton of milk. "Mama might wake up and wonder where I am." Marcus knew he should let her go, should watch her walk away and forget this ever happened. But the thought of her returning to an empty apartment with an unconscious mother made his stomach turn. "Lily," he said carefully, "if you need help again, if your mama keeps sleeping and you get hungry, you come find us, okay?" She nodded solemnly, as if he'd just made her a sacred promise. "Okay, mister. Thank you for my birthday dinner." As she walked away, disappearing around the corner like a ghost, Marcus realized something fundamental had shifted. The numbness he'd carried for 2 years was cracking, letting in light he wasn't sure he was ready for. The morning light filtered through the grimy windows of the clubhouse kitchen as Marcus cracked eggs into a well-seasoned cast-iron pan. The familiar rhythm of cooking had become his meditation over the years, a way to keep his hands busy when his mind threatened to wander into darker territories. He'd been up since 5, unable to sleep after the events of the previous evening. The little girl, Emma, had been real. He could still see her small frame silhouetted against the neon glow of the diner sign, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. The way she'd clutched that crumpled dollar bill like it was her lifeline haunted him more than he cared to admit. "You're up early, even for you." Marcus didn't turn around as Jake's gravelly voice cut through the morning quiet. The man moved with surprising stealth for someone his size, but Marcus had heard his boots on the wooden floor. After 20 years of riding together, they developed an almost telepathic awareness of each other's presence. Couldn't sleep. Marcus flipped the eggs with practiced ease. "Coffee's fresh if you want some." Jake poured himself a mug and leaned against the counter, studying his old friend. "This about last night? The kid?" Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Don't know what you mean." "Bullshit." Jake's tone was matter-of-fact, not accusatory. "You've been wound tighter than a drum since we left that diner, and don't think I didn't notice you asking Diane about the girl's situation." The eggs sizzled in the pan as Marcus remained silent. Diane had been surprisingly forthcoming once she realized they weren't just curious. Emma lived with her grandmother in the Riverside Apartments, the kind of place where the paint peeled faster than the landlord could evict tenants for late rent. Her mother had disappeared 2 years ago, leaving nothing but debt and a social services file that kept getting shuffled between overworked caseworkers. "Her grandmother's sick," Marcus finally said, sliding the eggs onto a plate. "Diabetes, kidney problems, can't work. They've been living on social, security and food stamps that don't stretch far enough." Jake nodded slowly. He'd grown up in similar circumstances before the Marines gave him structure and the Brotherhood gave him purpose. "What are you thinking?" Before Marcus could answer, the kitchen door swung open and Tommy stumbled in, his hair sticking up at odd angles and his t-shirt wrinkled beyond redemption. At 19, he was the youngest member of the Iron Ravens, taken in after aging out of the foster system with nowhere else to go. "Please tell me there's coffee," Tommy groaned, making a beeline for the pot. "And food. Lots of food." Marcus pushed the plate of eggs toward him without comment. Tommy's face lit up with gratitude as he grabbed a fork and dove in. The kid reminded Marcus of himself at that age, all sharp edges and barely contained hunger, both literal and metaphorical. "Tommy," Jake said casually, "you ever hear of the Riverside Apartments?" "That shithole off Henderson Street?" Tommy spoke around a mouthful of eggs. "Yeah, I crashed there for a few months before you guys took me in." "Why? What's the story with that place?" Tommy's expression darkened. "Slumlord owns about half the buildings in that area, collects rent but never fixes anything, half the units don't have working heat, and the water gets shut off every other month. Cops don't patrol there unless someone's shooting, and even then they take their time." He paused, studying Jake's face. "This about something specific?" Marcus and Jake exchanged a look. The Brotherhood had always operated by an unspoken code. Protect your own, don't mess with innocents, and never ignore someone truly in need. but they also understood the delicate balance of their existence. They walked a line between the law and the streets, and crossing too far in either direction could bring unwanted attention. "There's a kid," Marcus said finally. 7 years old, living with her sick grandmother. They're not making it. Tommy set down his fork. Despite his youth, he'd seen enough of the world's ugliness to understand the implications. "What kind of help are we talking about?" "The kind that doesn't involve anyone getting hurt," Jake answered firmly. "We're not vigilantes, and we're not running a charity, but sometimes the system fails people who deserve better." Marcus finished his coffee and rinsed the mug in the sink. "I'm going for a ride. Clear my head." "Want company?" Jake asked. "Nah, need to think." As Marcus headed for the door, Tommy called after him. "Marcus? That kid you're talking about, she's lucky she found you instead of someone else." Marcus paused without turning around. Through the kitchen window, he could see his Harley waiting in the morning sun, chrome gleaming like a promise of freedom. But for the first time in years, the open road wasn't calling to him. Instead, his thoughts kept drifting to a small apartment across town where a little girl was probably waking up to another day of empty cupboards and worried whispers. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of the clubhouse kitchen as Marcus cracked eggs into a large skillet. The familiar ritual of cooking breakfast had become something he looked forward to again, though he couldn't quite explain why. Maybe it was the sound of small feet padding across the wooden floors upstairs, or the way Emma's voice carried down the hallway as she talked to herself while getting dressed. 3 weeks had passed since she'd wandered into their lives, and the steel wolves had adapted in ways that would have seemed impossible before. Tank had installed a proper lock on one of the upstairs rooms and somehow procured a twin bed, complete with pink sheets, that he claimed fell off a truck. Diesel had taken to keeping juice boxes in his saddlebags, and even Razor had been caught reading bedtime stories in his gruff, cigarette-roughened voice. "Something smells good down there," Emma called out as she appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing an oversized steel wool's t-shirt that Tank had given her as a makeshift nightgown. Her hair stuck up at odd angles, and she rubbed sleep from her eyes with tiny fists. "Scrambled eggs and toast," Marcus replied, plating her portion on the least chipped dish they could find. "Extra cheese, just how you like it." She bounded down the stairs and climbed onto the bar stool they designated as hers, swinging her legs while she waited. The transformation in her appearance over the past weeks was remarkable. The hollow cheeks had filled out, her eyes were brighter, and she'd gained enough energy to keep the entire club on their toes. "Marcus," she said between bites of toast, "why don't you have pictures?" He paused, coffee mug halfway to his lips. "What do you mean?" "Tank has pictures of his mom on his dresser. Diesel has that photo of his dog. But you don't have any pictures anywhere." The simple observation hit him like a physical blow. He'd removed every photograph after the accident, unable to bear the constant reminder of what he'd lost. The empty walls and bare surfaces had become so normal he'd forgotten how strange it might appear to others. "I used to have pictures," he said carefully, "but sometimes looking at old photos makes people sad." Emma nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to her 7-year-old mind. "Is that why you have that sad look sometimes, when you think nobody's watching?" Before he could respond, the clubhouse door burst open and Diesel strode in, his face grim. "We got problems, boss. Big ones." Marcus felt Emma tense beside him, and he instinctively moved closer to her. "What kind of problems?" "The kind with badges and warrants," Diesel said, glancing meaningfully at Emma. "They're asking questions about our recent house guest." The blood in Marcus's veins turned to ice. He'd known this day might come, but he'd pushed the worry aside, focusing instead on the day-to-day routine of caring for Emma. Now reality came crashing back with devastating clarity. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Maybe hours, maybe less." Diesel's expression softened as he looked at Emma, who had stopped eating and was watching their exchange with growing alarm. "Tank's working his contacts, trying to buy us some time." Emma's voice was small and frightened. Are you in trouble because of me? Marcus knelt down beside her stool, taking her small hands in his scarred ones. Listen to me, sweetheart. Remember how we talked about how sometimes grown-ups have complicated rules about where children can live? She nodded, her eyes filling with tears she was trying hard not to shed. Well, some people think you should be somewhere else, somewhere more traditional, like a foster home. The words came out as a whisper. Maybe. We don't know yet. Marcus felt his chest tighten as he saw the fear creep across her features. But I want you to know that no matter what happens, we're going to make sure you're safe and taken care of. That's a promise. Emma threw her arms around his neck, holding on with desperate strength. I don't want to go anywhere else. I want to stay here with you and Tank and everyone. This is my home now. The words shattered something inside Marcus that had been carefully held together with denial and routine. This little girl had somehow become the center of their world, the missing piece that none of them had realized they needed. The thought of losing her felt like losing his family all over again, except this time he might actually have the power to prevent it. We're going to figure this out, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Whatever it takes, we're going to find a way to keep you safe. As he held her small, trembling form, Marcus made a silent vow. He'd failed to protect his own daughter, but he wouldn't fail Emma, not while there was breath in his body and fight left in his soul. The warehouse echoed with the rumble of motorcycle engines as the iron wolves rolled in one by one. Marcus watched from the second-floor office window as his brothers parked their bikes in neat rows, their leather cuts gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Below him, Lily sat at an old folding table, carefully coloring in a picture book Tommy had found somewhere in the depths of the clubhouse. Church in 5, Marcus called down to the gathering crowd. The men filed into the main room, taking their usual spots around the scarred wooden table that had seen more heated discussions than Marcus cared to count. But today felt different. The energy was lighter, charged with something he hadn't felt in years, purpose beyond mere survival. Brothers, Marcus began, standing at the head of the table. We've got a situation. Diesel cracked his knuckles. Someone giving the kid trouble? Because I've got some ideas about handling that. Not that kind of situation. Marcus glanced toward the door, where Lily remained safely out of earshot. Social services is going to come looking eventually. A 7-year-old doesn't just disappear from the system without someone noticing. Tommy leaned forward. What are you thinking, Prez? I'm thinking we need to make this right. Legal. Permanent. The words felt foreign in his mouth. The Iron Wolves had spent decades operating in the grey areas of the law, and here he was talking about courts and paperwork. Snake laughed, a harsh sound that bounced off the concrete walls. You want to adopt her? Come on, Marcus. We're bikers, not suburban soccer dads. Look around, Snake. Marcus gestured to the room. Half of us grew up in foster care. The other half wish we had. You want to tell me none of you know what it's like to be thrown away? The room fell silent. Marcus saw recognition flicker across weathered faces, memories of childhood pain that never quite healed. I'm not talking about changing who we are, Marcus continued. But maybe it's time we figured out who we could be. Diesel cleared his throat. The kid's aunt. What's her story? Junkie. In and out of rehab. The system was looking for relatives when I found Lily on the street. Marcus had spent the morning making calls, using connections both legitimate and otherwise. Far as I can tell, the aunt doesn't want the responsibility anyway. So what's the play? Tommy asked. Marcus pulled out a manila folder. I talked to a lawyer. Family friend of Father Rodriguez. Says there's a process for this kind of thing. Emergency guardianship first, then we work toward something more permanent. You're serious about this, Viper said. It wasn't a question, dead serious. The room erupted in murmurs. Some skeptical, others cautiously supportive. Marcus let them talk, knowing this decision would reshape everything about how they operated. What about the club? Snake demanded. We've got business, responsibilities. You can't just... The club's been my life for 15 years, Marcus cut him off. Since Sarah died, it's been all I had. But that kid out there, she's given me something I thought was gone forever. He paused, seeing Sarah's face in his mind. What would she think about all this? He already knew the answer. She'd have brought Lily home that first night. I won't ask any of you to change your lives, Marcus said, but I will ask you to respect mine. Tommy stood up. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. We all do. He looked around the table, daring anyone to disagree. Most nodded their agreement. The lawyer says the process could take months, Marcus continued. In the meantime, I need to show I can provide a stable home. That means some adjustments around here. Like what? Diesel asked. Like no more late-night parties when she's here. Like watching our language. Like making sure our business stays our business. Marcus met each man's eyes in turn, like being the kind of men a little girl can look up to. The implications hung heavy in the air. They all knew what kind of life they lived, what kinds of things happened in the shadows of their world. Anyone who can't handle that is free to walk, Marcus said quietly. No hard feelings. Nobody moved. Finally, Viper spoke up. Guess we better teach her how to change oil then. Laughter rippled through the room, breaking the tension. Marcus felt something loosening in his chest, a knot of worry he'd been carrying since the moment he decided to fight for custody. All right then, he said. Meeting adjourned. As the men filed out, talking quietly among themselves, Marcus remained at the table. Through the window, he could see Lily showing her coloring book to Diesel, who was examining it with exaggerated seriousness. The big man nodded approvingly and gave her a thumbs up that made her beam. Maybe Snake was right. Maybe they weren't suburban soccer dads. But maybe that was exactly what made them perfect for a little girl who needed protecting. The morning light filtered through the dusty windows of the clubhouse as Marcus sat hunched over a steaming cup of coffee, staring at the small bundle of clothes Maya had worn yesterday. Tank had washed them in the old machine out back, but they were little more than rags held together by determination and hope. The sight made something twist painfully in his chest. She's still asleep, Diesel whispered, settling into the chair across from him. The big man's face was softer than Marcus had seen it in years. Been watching her breathe for the last hour. Kid sleeps like she's ready to run at any second. Marcus nodded, understanding that restless vigilance all too well. He'd seen it in war zones, in the eyes of civilians caught in crossfire. Maya had been living in her own private battlefield, and somehow she'd chosen them as her unlikely allies. We need to talk about what comes next, Razor said, emerging from the shadows near the bar. His voice carried its usual edge, but Marcus caught the underlying concern. Word's gonna spread about the girl. People are asking questions. What kind of people? Marcus's voice dropped to a dangerous growl. The wrong kind. Razor pulled out his phone, showing them a blurry photo of Maya from yesterday. Someone snapped this when she was outside the diner, posted it online with some sob story about a homeless kid and the big bad bikers. It's already got 300 shares. Tank appeared in the doorway, his massive frame filling the space. Social services called 10 minutes ago. They want to do a welfare check. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd known this moment would come, but he wasn't prepared for the fierce protectiveness that surged through him. The thought of strangers taking Maya away, of her disappearing into a system that might not understand what she'd been through, made his hands clench into fists. When? He managed. This afternoon. I told them we were a legitimate business and the child was visiting family, but that'll only buy us a few hours. Marcus stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the concrete floor. She's not going into the system. Not if I can help it. Marcus Diesel's voice carried a warning. You know what that means, right? If you want to keep her, really keep her, you're going to have to prove you can take care of a kid. They'll dig into everything, your record, your lifestyle, this place. Then that's what I'll do. The conviction in his own voice surprised him. 6 months ago, Marcus had been a man with nothing to lose, skating on the edge of self-destruction. Now he was contemplating upending his entire life for a 7-year-old girl who'd stolen his heart with a single desperate request for birthday cake. You sure about this, brother? Tank asked quietly. Because once you start down this road, there's no going back. She'll become your responsibility, your priority. Everything else comes second. Marcus thought about his daughter Emma, about the father he'd failed to be when it mattered most, about second chances and redemption, and the way Maya had looked at him with such trust, despite every reason to be afraid. "I'm sure." Footsteps echoed from the back room, small and hesitant. Maya appeared in the doorway, clutching the oversized t-shirt she'd slept in. Her dark hair was a mess of tangles, and her eyes held that wary alertness that broke Marcus's heart. "Good morning, sweetheart," he said, softening his voice. "How did you sleep?" "Okay." She padded closer, studying their serious faces. "Are you mad about something?" "No, baby. We're not mad." Marcus knelt down to her level. "Maya, do you remember what you told me yesterday about not having anywhere to go?" She nodded, suddenly looking smaller and more vulnerable. "Well, what if I told you that you could stay here? With us? With me?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment she looked so hopeful it physically hurt. Then her face fell. "But I don't have any money, and I'm not good at much except staying quiet and staying out of the way." "Oh, sweetheart." Marcus reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he gently touched her cheek. "You don't need money, and you don't need to be anything other than exactly who you are. You're smart and brave and kind, and any man would be proud to call you his daughter." "Daughter?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "If you want. If you'd like me to be your dad." The tears that filled her eyes weren't sad this time. They were something else entirely, hope and wonder and a desperate, fragile joy. She launched herself into his arms, and Marcus held her close, feeling the final pieces of his shattered heart click back into place. They had work to do, battles to fight, and a system to navigate. But as Maya clung to him with fierce determination, Marcus knew he'd found his purpose again. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of the clubhouse as Marcus sat hunched over a cup of black coffee, watching Lily methodically eat her way through a stack of pancakes that seemed almost as tall as she was. 3 days had passed since she'd first stumbled into their world, and already the place felt different. Softer somehow, though he'd never admit it out loud. "Slow down, kid," he said, suppressing a smile as syrup dripped down her chin. "Food ain't going anywhere." She looked up at him with those enormous dark eyes, fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Sorry, I keep thinking I might wake up and it'll all be gone." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He knew that feeling too well, the fear that anything good was just temporary, waiting to be ripped away. "Hey," he said, his voice gentler than he'd used in years. "You're not going anywhere, all right?" "Neither am I." Tank emerged from the back room, his massive frame filling the doorway. Over the past few days, Marcus had watched the gentle giant transform into something he'd never seen before, a protector with purpose. Tank had taken to sleeping in the main room, claiming the couch was more comfortable than his bed. They all knew better. "School starts in an hour," Tank announced, holding up a pink backpack they'd picked up yesterday during their shopping expedition. The sight of the intimidating biker carrying children's supplies had drawn stares, but Tank wore his new role with pride. Lily's face scrunched up with worry. "What if the other kids ask questions? What if they want to meet my parents?" Marcus exchanged a glance with Tank. They'd discussed this scenario extensively. The story they'd crafted was simple. Marcus was her uncle, recently granted custody after a family tragedy. It wasn't entirely a lie, considering how they both felt about their makeshift family arrangement. "You tell them what we practiced," Marcus said, kneeling down to her level. "And if anyone gives you trouble, you call me immediately. Tank's gonna walk you there and pick you up after. You're never gonna be alone, understand?" She nodded solemnly, then surprised him by throwing her small arms around his neck. The gesture was so natural, so trusting, that it nearly broke something inside his chest. When had he last hugged someone who wasn't saying goodbye forever? 20 minutes later, Marcus watched from his bike as Tank walked Lily toward Roosevelt Elementary, her small hand dwarfed by his massive one. Other parents shot curious glances their way, the tattooed giant in leather and the tiny girl who chattered animatedly about everything she saw. His phone buzzed. A text from Rodriguez: need to meet. 1 hour. Usual place. Marcus frowned. Detective Rodriguez only reached out when trouble was brewing, and lately their arrangement had been more crucial than ever. Having a dirty cop on payroll meant staying one step ahead of investigations, but it also meant walking a constant tightrope. An hour later, Marcus sat across from Rodriguez in a dingy diner on the south side. The detective looked nervous, his usually slick hair disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. "We got a problem," Rodriguez said without preamble. "Internal Affairs is sniffing around. Someone reported suspicious activity, unusual movement around your clubhouse. Talk of you guys going soft." "Who?" "Don't know yet, but they're asking questions about missing person reports, specifically missing kids." Rodriguez leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There's been chatter about a little girl seen with your crew. If they start digging..." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. "What kind of chatter?" "The kind that gets children's services involved, the kind that gets warrants issued." Rodriguez's eyes were serious. "Look, I can buy you time, redirect their attention, but you need to clean up whatever loose ends you've got. Fast." "She's not a loose end," Marcus said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Jesus, Marcus. Tell me you didn't..." "Watch yourself," Marcus interrupted, his hand moving instinctively toward his jacket. "The kid's under our protection. That's all you need to know." Rodriguez held up his hands. Okay, but protection from what? If there's no crime, no danger, then why not just..." "Because the system failed her once already." The words came out harsher than Marcus intended. "Because some things matter more than following rules that don't work." They sat in tense silence for a moment. Finally, Rodriguez sighed. "I can give you maybe a week before the heat becomes too much to handle. Whatever you're planning, make it happen fast." As Marcus rode back toward the clubhouse, Rodriguez's warning echoed in his head. He'd known this day would come eventually, the day when their world would collide with Lily's need for stability and safety, but he'd hoped for more time. His phone rang as he pulled into the parking lot. Tank's voice was tight with concern. "We got company. 3 black SUVs just pulled up to the school. They're asking about Lily." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Someone had found them faster than expected. Marcus stood in the doorway of what used to be Sophie's room, watching as she carefully arranged her few possessions on the dresser. 3 days had passed since she'd first walked into the clubhouse, and somehow the space had already begun to transform. The bare walls that once held only shadows now displayed crayon drawings she'd made, stick figures of motorcycles, and people with impossibly large smiles. "You sure this bed's comfortable enough?" he asked, adjusting the new comforter they'd picked up that morning. The shopping trip had been an adventure in itself, with half the Iron Wolves trailing behind them through Target like the world's most intimidating entourage. Sophie bounced on the mattress, her face lighting up. "It's perfect. Way better than the cardboard under the bridge." She paused, looking up at him with those serious eyes that seemed too old for her face. "Marcus, what happens if they find me?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. He'd been dreading this conversation, knowing it was inevitable. Social services had protocols, procedures. A little girl couldn't just disappear from the system without someone asking questions. "Hey." He sat down on the edge of the bed, choosing his words carefully. "Remember what I told you about family? Sometimes the family you choose is stronger than anything else." Before Sophie could respond, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Tank appeared in the doorway, his massive frame filling the space. "Marcus, we got a problem." The tone in Tank's voice made Marcus's blood run cold. He glanced at Sophie, who had gone very still, clutching a stuffed rabbit they'd bought earlier. "What kind of problem?" "The kind with badges." 3 cars just pulled up outside. Marcus felt the world tilt slightly. He'd known this moment would come, but not this soon. Not when Sophie was finally starting to feel safe. "Sophie," he said gently, keeping his voice steady. I need you to stay here for a few minutes, okay? Tank's going to stay with you. No. Her voice was small but firm. I want to come with you. Listen to me. He knelt down so they were eye level. Sometimes grown-ups have to handle grown-up things. But I promise you, and you know I keep my promises, I'm not going anywhere. Tank nodded, understanding passing between the two men. Whatever happened next, Sophie would be protected. Marcus made his way through the clubhouse, past brothers who had already taken their positions, not threatening but ready. These men had faced down rival gangs, police raids, and federal investigations, but protecting a little girl felt like the most important battle they'd ever fought. Detective Sarah Chen stood waiting in the main room, flanked by two uniformed officers. Marcus recognized her from previous encounters. She was tough but fair, someone who understood the complex ecosystem of the city's underbelly. Detective Chen. Marcus kept his voice neutral. To what do we owe the pleasure? Cut the act, Marcus. We both know why I'm here. She pulled out a tablet, showing him a missing person report. Sophie's school photo stared back at him. The same face, but hollow-eyed and gaunt compared to the girl upstairs. Sophie Martinez, age 7, disappeared from her foster home 4 days ago. Foster home? Marcus felt anger building in his chest. You mean the place where she was so well cared for that she ended up on the streets, digging through our garbage for food? Chen's expression softened slightly. I know the system isn't perfect, but she belongs with trained caregivers, not, she gestured around the clubhouse, here, with people who actually give a damn about her? Diesel spoke up from across the room. Lady, that kid's been through hell. Look around. You see anyone here who'd hurt a child? I see a motorcycle club with a history of violence and illegal activity. You see a bunch of men who found a starving little girl and gave her food, shelter, and safety, Marcus countered. What you don't see is where the hell the system was when she needed it most. Chen studied him for a long moment. You can't just adopt a child, Marcus. It doesn't work that way. There are procedures, background checks, home studies. Then let's do them. The word surprised even him. Chen's eyebrows shot up. Excuse me? You heard me. Whatever it takes. Procedures, paperwork, inspections. I'll do it all. Marcus stepped closer, his voice intense but controlled. But I'm not letting that little girl go back into a system that failed her. Not without a fight. Marcus, she chose us, Detective. Out of everyone in this city, she walked up to us and asked for help. Maybe that means something. Chen looked around the room, taking in the faces of men who had collectively decided that one small girl was worth changing their entire world for. This is highly irregular, so is a 7-year-old having to survive on the streets. The detective closed her tablet, seeming to wrestle with a decision that went against every protocol she'd been trained to follow. The morning sun cast long shadows across the clubhouse as Marcus stood at the window watching Lily help Dutch organize his tools in the garage. 3 weeks had passed since she'd first walked into their lives, and the transformation was remarkable, not just in her but in all of them. She's got him wrapped around her little finger, Viper said, joining Marcus at the window with 2 cups of coffee. Marcus accepted the cup, steam curling between them. We all are. It was true. The Iron Wolves had become something none of them expected, a family. Real meals happened around the table now instead of everyone grabbing whatever was available. Lily's laughter echoed through rooms that had known only the serious business of club politics for years. Even the newest prospects treated her like a little sister, teaching her card games and letting her help with maintenance on the bikes. Boss! Tank's voice cut through the peaceful morning, urgent and low. Marcus turned to see him standing in the doorway, phone pressed to his ear, face grim. What is it? Detective Morrison. Says she needs to see you. Now. The familiar weight settled in Marcus's chest. He'd known this day would come, had been preparing for it, even as he'd allowed himself to hope it wouldn't. Tell her I'll be there in 20. Viper set down his coffee. Want backup? No. Keep an eye on things here. Marcus found Detective Morrison in the same diner where they'd met before, her expression unreadable as she stirred sugar into coffee she probably wouldn't drink. He slid into the booth across from her, saying nothing. "We found her father," Morrison said without preamble. The words hit him like a physical blow, though he kept his expression neutral. "And?" "Overdose. Been dead for 6 months. Neighbors said Lily had been on her own since at least January." Morrison's voice softened slightly. "Maybe longer." Marcus stared at the table between them, processing. 6 months. She'd survived on the streets for 6 months before finding the courage to approach them. The magnitude of her resilience staggered him. "There's more," Morrison continued. "No other family we can locate. Father's family disowned him years ago when the addiction got bad. Mother died when Lily was 3, car accident. So, what happens now?" Morrison leaned forward. "Officially, she goes into the system. Foster care, probably group homes given her age and the shortage of families willing to take older kids." The word officially hung between them, loaded with implication. "But," Marcus prompted. "I've been watching this situation, Marcus, watching how she's thrived with you and your club. I've never seen anything like it." Morrison pulled out a manila folder. "I've also been looking into your background. Before the club. Before everything went sideways." Marcus tensed. His past wasn't something he discussed, especially not with cops. Marine Corps, honorable discharge, bachelor's degree, steady job until... She paused. "Until you lost your daughter." The mention of Emma sent a sharp pain through his chest. "What's your point, detective?" "My point is that you're not who people think you are, and neither is your club, apparently. I've had social services do a wellness check. Lily's healthy, happy, safe. She's gained 12 pounds, her reading level has jumped 2 grades, and she talks about all of you like you hung the moon." Marcus didn't respond, afraid to hope. "There's a process," Morrison said carefully. "Background checks, home studies, character references. It won't be easy given the club's reputation, but if someone were to apply to be a foster parent, someone with a clean record who could demonstrate a stable environment..." The folder remained on the table between them. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus asked. Morrison smiled for the first time. "Because 17 years ago, I was 8 years old, and my parents died in a house fire. I got shuffled through 7 foster homes before I aged out. Some were okay, most were just collecting checks. None of them loved me." She tapped the folder. "That little girl loves you, and unless I'm completely wrong about people, you love her too." Marcus thought about Lily's face at breakfast that morning, how she'd carefully divided her pancakes to share with Dutch's ancient bulldog, how she'd hugged him goodnight every evening without fail, how she'd started calling him Marcus instead of Mr. Marcus, a small intimacy that felt enormous. "The paperwork's in there," Morrison said, standing. "Think about it." She walked away, leaving the folder on the scarred Formica table. Marcus stared at it for a long time before finally opening it. Application for foster care certification, pages of forms, requirements, procedures, a chance. When he returned to the clubhouse, Lily was in the common room teaching Viper how to braid friendship bracelets, her tongue poking out in concentration. She looked up when he entered, face lighting up. "Marcus, look what I'm making you." She held up a half-finished bracelet in black and silver, the club colors. Marcus knelt beside her, decision crystallizing. "It's perfect, sweetheart." The courthouse steps felt cold beneath Marcus's boots as he sat waiting for the hearing to begin. 3 weeks had passed since the raid. 3 weeks of legal maneuvering and paperwork that made his head spin worse than any bar fight ever had. Beside him, Sarah clutched a manila folder containing character references from teachers, neighbors, and, surprisingly, half the motorcycle club. "You sure about this?" Tommy asked, settling down on the step below them. His cut was gone, replaced by a simple black jacket that made him look like any other concerned citizen. "Once you're in the system as her guardian, there's no going back." Marcus watched Sarah practice her handwriting in a small notebook, her tongue poking out in concentration. The bruises from her father's final rage had faded to yellow shadows, but the nightmares still came. Last night she'd crawled into his bed at 2 in the morning, whispering about monsters in her closet. "Already can't go back," he said quietly. "She's changed everything." The courtroom was smaller than he'd expected, wood-paneled and formal in a way that made his leather jacket feel like armor. Sarah sat between Marcus and the court-appointed advocate, swinging her legs nervously. Her father sat across the aisle with his public defender, sporting his own collection of bruises courtesy of County Jail's unofficial justice system. When Judge Morrison called them forward, Marcus felt the weight of every mistake he'd ever made pressing down on his shoulders. The prosecutor laid out the case methodically, evidence of prolonged neglect, documentation of abuse, testimony from neighbors who'd heard the screaming but never called for help until it was almost too late. "Mr. Chen," the judge said, turning to Marcus with sharp eyes that seemed to catalogue every tattoo, every scar, "you understand that guardianship of a minor is not a temporary arrangement? This child has already experienced significant trauma. The court needs assurance that you can provide stability." Marcus stood, his hands steady despite the chaos in his chest. "Your Honor, I know what I look like. I know what people think when they see me." He gestured to his ink-covered arms, the club insignia on his jacket. "But Sarah saved my life before I ever had the chance to save hers." The judge raised an eyebrow, inviting him to continue. "6 months ago, I had nothing left to lose. I was drowning in grief and rage, and I didn't care who got hurt in the process. Then this little girl walked up to our clubhouse on her birthday, hungry and alone, asking for help. She could have gone anywhere, but she chose us. She chose to believe that underneath all the leather and attitude, we might be good people." Sarah looked up at him with those wide brown eyes that had haunted his dreams and healed his nightmares. She was right. Sarah didn't just need saving, she needed to know she was worth saving. And in teaching her that, she taught me something I'd forgotten. Family isn't just blood, it's the people who show up when everything falls apart. It's choosing to love someone even when it's inconvenient or scary or completely changes your life. The social worker testified next, describing her visits to the clubhouse with barely concealed amazement. Sarah's grades had improved dramatically. She'd gained 12 pounds. The night terrors were decreasing. Most importantly, she'd started talking about the future, wanting to learn to ride a motorcycle when she was older, asking about high school, making plans that stretched beyond mere survival. The unconventional nature of this placement initially concerned our department, the social worker admitted. However, Mr. Chen has exceeded every expectation. He's attended parenting classes, installed safety features throughout his residence, and created a support network that most traditional families would envy. When Sarah's father was given the chance to speak, he mumbled something about getting clean and wanting another chance. But his words carried no weight against the medical reports, the photographs, the testimony of teachers who'd watched Sarah flinch away from sudden movements. The judge deliberated for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. When she returned, her expression was unreadable. "This court has reviewed all evidence and testimony. Parental rights of the biological father are hereby permanently terminated." Sarah's sharp intake of breath was audible in the silent courtroom. "Furthermore, temporary guardianship is granted to Marcus Chen, with review in 6 months to determine permanent placement." The gavel fell like thunder, and Sarah launched herself into Marcus's arms with enough force to nearly knock him over. She was crying and laughing simultaneously, clinging to him like he might disappear if she let go. "Does this mean I can stay?" she whispered against his shoulder. "Yeah, little bird," he murmured back, his own voice thick with emotion. "You can stay." Behind them, Tommy whooped loudly before catching himself in the formal setting. The other club members who'd shown up for moral support were grinning like idiots, and even the court reporter was wiping her eyes. As they walked out into the afternoon sunshine, Marcus realized he wasn't the same man who'd entered that courthouse. He was something better. He was Sarah's guardian, her protector, her family, and for the first time in years, that was enough. The warehouse had been transformed into something Marcus barely recognized. What was once a cold, empty space now buzzed with purpose and hope. 3 weeks had passed since the judge's decision, and the Haven Project, as they'd started calling it, was taking shape faster than anyone had imagined. Sophie darted between the volunteers, her small frame weaving through the organized chaos with practiced ease. She carried a clipboard that was almost as tall as she was, checking off items with the serious expression of someone far older than her 7 years. The sight never failed to make Marcus smile, even on the hardest days. "Marcus!" she called out, rushing over with excitement lighting up her face. "Mrs. Rodriguez says the kitchen passed inspection, and the first families can move in tomorrow." He knelt down to her level, accepting the clipboard she thrust at him. The list was covered in her careful handwriting, each task marked with elaborate check marks and star doodles. "You've been busy, little boss. What's next on the agenda?" "Well," Sophie said, consulting an imaginary watch on her wrist, "Iron Mike is setting up the last of the bunk beds in Building 2, and Diesel is teaching the Henderson kids how to change a tire in the auto shop." She paused, her expression growing thoughtful. "Do you think their mom will like having a safe place to learn a job skill?" Marcus felt that familiar tightness in his chest, the one that came whenever Sophie's wisdom caught him off guard. "I think she'll love it, kiddo. You had a pretty good idea when you suggested we turn part of the garage into a training center." The transformation hadn't been without its challenges. Some of the Reapers had struggled with the change, uncomfortable with social workers and case managers walking through what had once been their exclusive territory. A few had left entirely, unable to reconcile their old life with this new purpose. But most had stayed, drawn by something they couldn't quite name but desperately needed. "Marcus, we got a problem." Razor's voice cut through the ambient noise. He approached with Sarah Chen, the project coordinator they'd hired to help navigate the complex web of city bureaucracy and social services. Sophie immediately positioned herself beside Marcus, her small hand slipping into his. It had become her habit whenever serious conversations began, as if she could anchor him to calmer waters through sheer proximity. "The Morrison family," Sarah began, consulting her tablet. "They were supposed to move in next week, but there's been a complication. The father showed up at their temporary shelter last night. He's been drinking, making threats." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. The Morrisons, a mother and 2 young children, had been living in their car before finding space at an overcrowded shelter. The woman bore the faded yellow marks of old bruises, the kind Marcus had learned to recognize all too well. "What kind of threats?" he asked, though he already knew the answer would make his blood boil. "The usual. He wants his family back, says he's cleaned up his act, but Linda Morrison is terrified, and honestly, I don't blame her." Sarah's expression was grim. The shelter can only hold them for another 2 days before they have to leave. Sophie tugged on Marcus's hand. When he looked down, her eyes held that familiar determination that had first drawn him to her outside the diner. The scared mom with the little boy and baby girl, right? "I met them yesterday when you took me to visit the shelters." "That's right, sweetheart. And the mean dad wants to hurt them again?" Marcus exchanged a glance with Razor. They'd tried to shield Sophie from the darker aspects of their work, but she had an uncanny ability to understand the reality of broken families. "We won't let that happen," Marcus said firmly. "This place exists to keep people safe." "I know," Sophie said simply. "That's why we built it." Her matter-of-fact confidence steadied something in Marcus. He turned to Sarah. "Move them in tonight, quietly. And I want to know the minute this guy shows up looking for them." "Marcus," Razor said quietly, "you know we can't go back to the old ways of handling problems." "I'm not talking about the old ways." Marcus's voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "But this place means something. These people are under our protection now. There are legal ways to make sure he understands that." Sophie nodded approvingly. "Mrs. Rodriguez says the best protection is making sure people know they're not alone anymore." As if summoned by the mention of her name, Elena Rodriguez appeared from the direction of the kitchen, flour dusting her apron and a warm smile creasing her weathered face. She'd become the unofficial grandmother of the Haven Project, her presence bringing a sense of home that no amount of renovation could provide. "Dinner's ready," she announced, "and before anyone argues, That includes the Morrison family. I've already sent Iron Mike to collect them." Her tone brooked no argument. "Some things are more important than paperwork and protocol." Marcus felt Sophie's hand squeeze his as she grinned up at Elena. Sometimes the simplest acts of kindness were the most revolutionary. The courthouse steps felt cold beneath Marcus's boots as he waited for the hearing that would determine everything. 3 months had passed since that night in the warehouse, 3 months of legal proceedings, depositions, and endless paperwork. Maya sat beside him, her small hand tucked securely in his, while the other serpents formed a protective circle around them. "You ready for this, boss?" Tank asked, adjusting his tie awkwardly. The sight of the massive biker in a suit would have been comical under different circumstances. Marcus nodded, though his stomach churned with anxiety. Today, the judge would decide whether he could officially adopt Maya. The background checks had been thorough, his criminal record scrutinized under a microscope. Detective Rodriguez had testified on his behalf, describing how Marcus had risked everything to protect Maya and bring down Castellanos' operation. But there were no guarantees. "Whatever happens in there," Maya whispered, "you'll always be my dad." The words hit him harder than any punch he'd ever taken. Over the past months, watching her blossom from a frightened, hungry child into a confident, laughing girl had been the greatest privilege of his life. She'd started school, made friends, and slowly began to trust that this new life was permanent. Now that permanence hung in the balance. The courtroom was smaller than Marcus had expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. Judge Catherine Walsh, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the files spread before her. Maya's social worker, Mrs. Patterson, sat at the front, having become an unexpected ally in their fight. "Mr. Stone," Judge Walsh began, her voice carrying the weight of authority, "you understand the gravity of what you're requesting. Legal adoption creates permanent, irrevocable bonds between parent and child." "Yes, Your Honor, I understand completely." The judge's eyes moved to Maya, her expression softening slightly. "And Maya, do you understand what adoption means? That Mr. Stone would legally become your father?" Maya straightened in her chair, displaying the same courage that had led her to approach the serpents all those months ago. "Yes, ma'am, but he's already my dad. This just makes it official." A small smile tugged at the judge's lips before she composed herself again. She spent the next several minutes reviewing Marcus's transformation, the character witnesses who had testified, and the detailed reports about Maya's well-being. The silence stretched endlessly as she read. Finally, Judge Walsh set down her papers and looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Stone, your past is undeniably troubled. Violence, illegal activities, time served in state prison. These are serious concerns when considering the welfare of a child." Marcus felt his heart sink, but the judge continued. "However, the evidence before me paints a picture of remarkable transformation. Detective Rodriguez's testimony about your cooperation in dismantling a dangerous criminal organization, your legitimate business, providing honest work for former offenders, most importantly, the obvious bond you've formed with Maya, and the safe, loving environment you've created for her." She turned to Maya. "The child welfare reports consistently show a happy, healthy girl who has thrived under your care. Maya has gone from being severely malnourished and traumatized to becoming an honor student who speaks eloquently about her love for you and her new family." Marcus squeezed Maya's hand, hardly daring to breathe. "People can change, Mr. Stone. They can rise above their circumstances and become something better. You've demonstrated that transformation, not just in words, but through actions that put an innocent child's needs above your own safety." Judge Walsh picked up her gavel, and the sound echoed through the small courtroom like thunder. "Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that the adoption petition is granted. Maya Catherine Rodriguez Stone, you are hereby legally adopted by Marcus James Stone with all rights and responsibilities that entail." The gavel came down with finality, but Marcus barely heard it over the roar of blood in his ears. Maya launched herself into his arms, tears streaming down both their faces. Behind them, the serpents erupted in cheers that the bailiff had to quiet with stern looks. "Congratulations, Dad," Maya whispered against his neck. Dad. He'd never imagined that word could hold such power, such perfect completion of a life he'd thought was beyond redemption. As they walked down the courthouse steps together, surrounded by their unconventional family of bikers who'd become uncles and brothers, Marcus felt something he'd never experienced before: absolute certainty about his purpose in life. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot where their motorcycles waited. Maya's helmet, bright purple with silver stars, her choice, hung from the handlebars of his bike. She'd be riding behind him, arms wrapped around his waist, trusting him completely to get her home safely. Home. The word meant something entirely different now. "So what now, Dad?" Maya asked, already reaching for her helmet. Marcus looked down at his daughter, and grinned. "Now we go home and celebrate. Tank's making his famous birthday cake." "It's not my birthday. Today you became a stone. That makes it the most important birthday of all." The courthouse steps felt cold beneath Maya's small feet as she climbed them beside Tank, her hand tucked securely in his massive palm. Behind them, the rumble of Harley engines announced the arrival of the Iron Wolves, but today they came not as outlaws, but as family supporting one of their own. Judge Patricia Hernandez had seen many cases cross her bench in 30 years, but the sight of the leather-clad bikers filing respectfully into her courtroom alongside social workers and child advocates was certainly a first. She adjusted her glasses and studied the man standing before her, Thomas "Tank" Morrison, whose reputation she knew well from police reports, now seeking to legally adopt the 7-year-old girl who gazed up at him with unwavering trust. "Mr. Morrison," Judge Hernandez began, her voice carrying the weight of careful consideration, "this court has reviewed your petition, the home study reports, and the testimony of numerous character witnesses. I must say, your transformation over these past months has been remarkable." Tank's jaw tightened imperceptibly. He'd known this moment would come, the judgment, the weighing of his past against his present. Maya squeezed his hand, sensing his tension, and he looked down to find her offering him the same brave smile she'd worn that first night when she'd asked for help. "Your Honor," Tank said, his voice steady despite the thundering of his heart, "I know what I was. I know the mistakes I made, the laws I broke. But this little girl," he paused, looking down at Maya, "she saved me when I couldn't save myself. I'm asking for the chance to spend the rest of my life returning that favor." Sarah Chen, the social worker who had initially doubted Tank's suitability as a guardian, stepped forward. "Your Honor, if I may. In 15 years of child welfare work, I have never seen such a complete turnaround in circumstances. Mr. Morrison has not only provided Maya with a stable, loving home, but he's created an entire support network around her. He's completed anger management counseling, substance abuse prevention courses, and parenting classes, all while maintaining steady employment at the motorcycle repair shop he now co-owns." The judge's eyes moved to Maya, who had insisted on wearing her best dress, a blue one that Tank had helped her pick out specifically for today. "Maya, sweetheart, do you understand what's happening today?" Maya nodded solemnly. "Tank wants to be my real daddy forever. And I want that too, because he makes me feel safe, and he always keeps his promises, and he taught me how to ride a bike and how to change oil, and that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them." A murmur of emotion rippled through the courtroom. Even Judge Hernandez blinked back moisture as she processed the child's words. The court has also reviewed letters from teachers, neighbors, and yes, members of the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club, the judge continued. "It appears you've all undergone quite a transformation, focusing your energies on community service and youth mentorship programs." Razor stepped forward slightly from where the club sat in the gallery. "Your Honor, that little girl didn't just change Tank, She changed all of us, made us remember who we wanted to be underneath all the anger. We're proud to be her family too." Judge Hernandez reviewed the papers before her one final time, then looked up with a slight smile. "Maya, would you like to know what I've decided?" Maya nodded eagerly, and Tank felt his breath catch in his throat. "I hereby grant the petition for adoption. Thomas Morrison, congratulations. You are now legally Maya's father." The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Maya launched herself into Tank's arms with a squeal of joy, while grown bikers wiped away tears they'd never admit to shedding. Tank held his daughter, close, feeling a completion he'd never thought possible. "There is one condition," Judge Hernandez added, raising her voice above the celebration. "This court will conduct follow-up visits for the next year, not because we doubt your commitment, but because we want to document what appears to be a remarkable success story." As they walked down the courthouse steps together, Maya chattering excitedly about the celebration party the club had planned, Tank felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to find Detective Rodriguez, the cop who had arrested him more times than either could count. "Never thought I'd say this, Morrison, but congratulations. You found something worth fighting for." Tank nodded, understanding the weight of those words. "She found me first." The Iron Wolves' engines roared to life as the newly legal family prepared to ride home together. Maya, secure in her child's seat behind Tank, wrapped her arms around his waist. In her small voice, barely audible over the rumbling bikes, she whispered the words that made everything else fade away. "I love you, Daddy." Tank smiled, knowing that sometimes the best chapters in life begin with the simple act of showing up when someone needs you most. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Marcus sat in the defendant's chair, his weathered hands folded on the table before him, while Sophie squeezed into the gallery between Razor and Tank. She clutched the worn teddy bear he'd given her months ago, her small frame dwarfed by the imposing bikers who'd become her unlikely family. District Attorney Patricia Coleman stood before the jury, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today because Marcus Steele Rodriguez chose to take the law into his own hands. Yes, Vincent Caruso was a dangerous man. Yes, he trafficked children, but we must not, allow vigilante justice to replace our legal system." Marcus watched the jurors' faces, searching for any hint of sympathy. Most avoided his gaze. The grandmother in the front row seemed conflicted, her eyes drifting between him and Sophie. The businessman in seat 7 looked like he'd already made up his mind. "The defendant didn't just kill Vincent Caruso," Coleman continued. "He tortured him. He made him suffer. That's not justice. That's revenge. And if we excuse revenge when the victim deserves it, where does it end?" Sophie's attorney, Janet Kim, had been fighting the prosecution's attempts to use the girl's testimony. At 8 years old, she was technically old enough to testify, but Kim argued the trauma would be too severe. The judge had reserved his decision, leaving everyone in limbo. When Coleman finished her opening statement, Marcus's lawyer, David Chen, stood slowly. Chen wasn't the flashy type. He was a former public defender who'd seen too many good people destroyed by bad circumstances. "My client isn't a perfect man," Chen began, his voice steady and calm. "Marcus Rodriguez has made mistakes. He's lived a hard life, made hard choices. But when he found Sophie huddled outside that diner on her birthday, starving, terrified, abandoned, he didn't see a case number or a social services problem. He saw a child who needed help." Chen walked toward the jury box, making eye contact with each member. "Vincent Caruso didn't just abuse children. He sold them. He destroyed their innocence, their futures, their very souls. The police knew about him for years but couldn't make charges stick. How many children suffered while everyone followed proper procedures?" Marcus felt a tap on his shoulder. Razor had somehow moved closer, violating courtroom protocol. "She wants to talk to you," he whispered, nodding toward Sophie. The judge noticed the disruption. "Is there a problem, Mr. Chen?" Before Chen could respond, Sophie stood up. Her voice was small but clear. "I want to tell them about Marcus." The courtroom erupted. Coleman objected, Kim tried to quiet her client, and the judge banged his gavel repeatedly. But Sophie kept talking, her words cutting through the chaos. He saved me, not just from Vincent, but from everything. He taught me I was worth saving. Judge Harrison called for order, then requested a sidebar. The attorneys huddled around his bench, while Sophie remained standing, tears streaming down her face. Marcus twisted in his chair to look at her. "It's okay, sweetheart," he mouthed. When the sidebar ended, Judge Harrison addressed the courtroom with unusual gravity. "Given the circumstances, I'm going to allow limited testimony from the minor. However, we'll take special precautions to protect her well-being." 2 hours later, Sophie sat in a small chair beside the judge's bench, speaking into a microphone that seemed enormous in her tiny hands. The jury listened with rapt attention as she described her life before Marcus, the hunger, the fear, the nights when Vincent's friends would come to the house. "Marcus never hurt anybody who didn't deserve it," she said, her voice gaining strength. "And Vincent deserved it. He hurt lots of kids like me. Marcus made sure he couldn't hurt anybody else." Coleman's cross-examination was gentle but pointed. "Sophie, do you think it's okay to hurt people who do bad things?" "No," Sophie replied without hesitation. "But sometimes grown-ups have to protect kids when nobody else will." When court adjourned for the day, Marcus was allowed a brief moment with Sophie under heavy supervision. She ran to him, and he knelt to her level. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly. "Yes, I did. You told me family protects family." That evening, Marcus sat in his cell thinking about the grandmother juror, how she'd wiped her eyes during Sophie's testimony, about the businessman who'd leaned forward when Sophie described the other children Vincent had hurt, about the young mother in the back row who'd looked at Sophie the way parents look at their own children when they imagine them in danger. Tomorrow would bring closing arguments. Then the jury would decide whether protecting the innocent was worth more than following the rules, whether love and desperation could justify the unforgivable, whether a broken man who'd found redemption in saving one small girl deserved redemption in return. The courthouse steps felt cold beneath Marcus's polished dress shoes as he waited with Emma's small hand clasped tightly in his. 3 months had passed since the shootout at the warehouse, 3 months of legal proceedings, social worker visits, and endless paperwork. Today would determine everything. Emma swung her legs from the bench, her new dress, the first real dress she'd ever owned, rustling softly. Marcus had let her pick it out herself, a bright yellow sundress with tiny white flowers that made her dark eyes sparkle. She'd grown in these months, not just physically, but in confidence. The hollow-cheeked, frightened child who'd approached him outside Murphy's bar seemed like a distant memory. "Marcus?" Her voice was small despite her newfound boldness. "What if they say no?" He squeezed her hand gently. The scars on his knuckles had faded, but the memories of that night remained vivid. Rodriguez was serving 25 to life. His drug operation dismantled, his network of corrupt officials exposed. The testimony Marcus had provided, along with evidence Jake had helped gather, had brought down half the city's underground trade. But none of that mattered, as much as the little girl beside him. "They won't say no, sweetheart. We've done everything right." The doors opened, and their lawyer, Sarah Chen, emerged with a smile that made Marcus's heart skip. Behind her came Judge Harrison, an older woman whose stern reputation had initially terrified Marcus, but whose fairness had become evident throughout the proceedings. "Mr. Torres?" Judge Harrison's voice carried across the steps. "I believe congratulations are in order." Marcus felt his knees go weak. Emma looked up at him, confusion clouding her features until she saw the tears streaming down his face. "Does that mean—" she started. "It means you're officially my daughter," Marcus whispered, dropping to one knee to face her. "If you want to be." The squeal of joy that erupted from Emma echoed off the courthouse walls. She launched herself into his arms with such force that he nearly toppled backward. Around them, people stopped to watch, smiling at the scene unfolding on the steps. "I want to tell Uncle Jake," Emma announced, pulling back to look at Marcus with shining eyes. "And Uncle Tommy and Uncle Rico and—" "Whoa there," Marcus laughed, standing and lifting her with him. "We'll tell everyone. The whole club's waiting for us at Murphy's." The ride to the bar felt different this time. Emma sat behind him on the Harley, her small arms wrapped around his waist, chattering excitedly about the celebration cake Jake had promised and the kitten Tommy had been hiding in the garage as a surprise gift. The weight of responsibility that had terrified Marcus 3 months ago now felt like purpose, like the missing piece he'd never known he'd been searching for. Murphy's bar looked the same from the outside, but as they pulled into the lot, Marcus could see decorations through the windows. Balloons, streamers, and a hand-painted banner that read, "Welcome Home," Emma hung across the back wall. The entire Devil's Saints Club had gathered, along with friends and neighbors from their small apartment building. "They did all this for me?" Emma asked in wonder as they dismounted. "They did it for us," Marcus corrected. "You're part of the family now, really and truly." Inside, the celebration was everything Emma had dreamed of and more. Jake had indeed made a 3-layer chocolate cake, though it listed dangerously to one side. Tommy presented the promised kitten, a tiny orange tabby that immediately claimed Emma's shoulder as its favorite perch. Rico had organized a collection among the club members and local businesses, resulting in enough money for Emma's college fund to make the lawyer whistle in appreciation. But the moment that would stay with Marcus forever came when old Pete Murphy, the bar's gruff owner, approached their table. He'd been skeptical of the arrangement at first, worried about bringing a child around the club. Now he knelt beside Emma's chair and pressed something into her hand. "This belonged to my granddaughter," he said quietly. "She's grown up now, lives in California with kids of her own, but I think she'd want you to have it." Emma opened her palm to reveal a small silver locket, tarnished with age but beautiful in its simplicity. Inside was a picture of a sunset over the ocean and an engraving that read, "Home is where love lives." "Thank you," Emma whispered, and Marcus watched the old man's eyes grow suspiciously bright. As the evening wound down and the last of the well-wishers headed home, Marcus found himself standing at the bar's entrance with Emma sleeping peacefully in his arms. The kitten purred against her chest and the locket gleamed at her throat. "Ready to go home, Dad?" Jake asked, emphasizing the title with a grin. Marcus looked down at his daughter, and felt the last of his old anger finally release its grip on his heart. "Yeah," he said softly, "we're ready." The courthouse steps felt cold beneath Marcus's boots as he emerged into the pale morning light, still processing what had just happened inside. 3 years. Vincent Castellano had received 3 years for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy charges. It wasn't life, but it was enough to dismantle his operation permanently. The FBI had seized his assets, his lieutenants were scattering like roaches, and most importantly, he'd never be able to threaten Sophie or anyone else Marcus cared about again. Detective Morrison caught up with him on the sidewalk, her expression mixing satisfaction with concern. "You did good in there, Marcus. Your testimony was solid." He nodded, watching the black sedan carrying Castellano disappear around the corner. "Is it really over? The immediate threat?" "Yes. Castellano's finished, and what's left of his organization won't risk coming after you. They've got bigger problems now." She paused, studying his face. "What will you do now?" Marcus looked toward the parking lot, where Razor waited beside his Harley, Sophie's small figure perched on the seat, swinging her legs impatiently. Behind them, the rest of the wolves stood in a loose semicircle, Tank, Bones, Ghost, and the others who'd become more than brothers over these past months. They'd all testified. All put their freedom on the line to see justice done. "Live," Marcus said simply. "Just live." The drive back to Iron Haven took an hour, Sophie chattering excitedly from her seat behind Marcus about the new books she'd gotten from the library and how Mrs. Chen next door had promised to teach her to make dumplings. Her voice was stronger now, filled with the confidence of a child who knew she was loved and protected. The hollow-cheeked girl who'd approached him in that alley 6 months ago seemed like a ghost from another lifetime. When they pulled into the garage, Marcus was surprised to see Sarah's car already there. Through the open bay doors, he could see her inside with Bones, reviewing paperwork at the makeshift desk they'd set up near the tool cabinets. The legitimate auto repair business they'd started was growing faster than any of them had expected. "Marcus!" Sophie scrambled off the bike and ran toward the office area. "Sarah, did you hear? The bad man is going to jail!" Sarah looked up with a smile that transformed her entire face. The scared, desperate woman who'd first brought Sophie here had evolved into someone confident and purposeful. The paralegal courses she'd been taking were paying off. She'd been invaluable in helping them navigate the legal complexities of their business transformation. "I heard," she said, lifting Sophie into a hug. "That's wonderful news." Marcus watched them together, feeling something settle in his chest that had been restless for months. Sarah had officially gained custody of Sophie 3 weeks ago, but they'd been operating as a family unit long before the courts made it legal. The small apartment above the garage had become home for all three of them, filled with Sophie's artwork on the walls and the smell of Sarah's cooking. Tank appeared from under the hood of a Ford pickup, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. "So it's done?" "It's done," Marcus confirmed. "Castellano's going away, and we're free to build whatever we want here." The big man's grin was infectious. "Good. Because I just landed us a contract with the city fleet. Steady work for the next 2 years." As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself standing in the doorway between the garage and the small apartment, watching Sophie help Sarah prepare dinner, while Razor regaled them with an increasingly embellished version of his testimony. The normalcy of it struck him, how something as simple as the sound of laughter echoing off concrete walls could feel like the greatest victory of his life. His phone buzzed with a text from Morrison, saw the evening news. "They're calling you the reformed biker who brought down a crime boss. Thought you should know before the reporters start calling." Marcus deleted the message without responding. Let them write their stories. He knew the truth. That salvation had come not from his own courage or moral awakening, but from a starving little girl who'd seen past his reputation to the broken man underneath. Everything good that had followed grew from that moment of trust. "Marcus," Sarah called from the kitchen, "dinner's ready." He joined them at the small table, Sophie chattering about her day while Sarah served plates of spaghetti and meatballs. Through the window, he could see several of the wolves working late in the garage, their voices carrying the easy camaraderie of men who'd found purpose beyond the darkness of their past. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, growing the business, helping other clubs make the transition away from criminal activity, being the father figure Sophie deserved. But tonight, surrounded by the family he'd never expected to have, Marcus finally understood what peace felt like. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Martinez read the final verdict. Marcus watched from the gallery as Tommy's shoulders sagged with relief. Community service and mandatory counseling instead of juvenile detention. It had taken 8 months of legal battles, character witnesses, and proving that the Serpents had become something entirely different from what they once were. "We did it," Maya whispered beside him, her small hand squeezing his calloused one. At 9 years old now, she had grown taller, her cheeks fuller, her eyes bright with the security that came from knowing she was loved unconditionally. The scared, hungry little girl who had stumbled into their lives seemed like a distant memory, though Marcus would never forget that moment that changed everything. Outside the courthouse, the rest of the crew waited by their bikes, but these weren't the same men who had once terrorized the neighborhood. Tank wore his volunteer firefighter badge proudly on his cut. Snake had just graduated from his GED program. Diesel ran a legitimate auto repair shop that employed 3 other former gang members. They had kept their brotherhood while transforming their purpose. "Barbecue at the center?" Tank called out, referring to the community center they had helped establish in the old warehouse district. What had started as a place to keep kids off the streets had evolved into a full-service facility, offering everything from after-school programs to job training for ex-offenders. Marcus nodded, lifting Maya onto his shoulders. "Wouldn't miss it. its tradition. The tradition had begun exactly 1 year ago, on Maya's 8th birthday, when she had asked for only one gift, to throw a party for all the kids in the neighborhood who might not have birthday parties of their own. That first celebration had drawn over 200 people, and it had become an annual event that brought the entire community together. As they rode through the streets, Marcus marveled at how different the neighborhood looked. Gone were the boarded-up buildings and graffiti-covered walls. Local businesses thrived, families walked the sidewalks without fear, and children played in newly renovated parks. The change hadn't happened overnight, but it had been steady and real. The community center buzzed with activity when they arrived. Former rival gang members worked alongside police officers to set up tables. Mrs. Chen from the corner store directed a group of teenagers hanging decorations. Father Miguel from St. Anthony's blessed the food, while Imam Hassan from the mosque across town helped serve it. Detective Rodriguez approached Marcus with a smile that would have been impossible to imagine 2 years ago. Heard the good news about Tommy. Kid's got a real chance now. He always did, Marcus replied. Just needed someone to believe in him. Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. You know, gang violence in this district is down 87% since you boys changed your ways. The chief wants to know if you'd consider expanding the program to other neighborhoods. Before Marcus could answer, Maya tugged on his shirt. Dad, can you help me with something? The word still sent warmth through his chest every time she said it. The adoption had been finalized 6 months ago, making official what had been true in their hearts from the beginning. Maya had given him purpose when he thought his life was over, and in return he had given her the family she had never known. What do you need, sweetheart? She led him to a quiet corner, where a young boy, maybe 7 years old, sat alone picking at his food. His clothes were too big, his eyes held that hollow look Marcus recognized all too well. His name is Carlos, Maya whispered. His mom works 3 jobs and his dad, well, he doesn't have one anymore. I think he's scared of everyone here. Marcus knelt down to the boy's level, remembering another scared child who had approached strangers when she had nowhere else to turn. Hey there, Carlos. I'm Marcus. Mind if I sit with you? The boy looked up warily, then nodded slightly. As Marcus settled beside him, Maya brought over a piece of birthday cake and sat on Carlos's other side. You know, Marcus said gently, when I was your age, I was scared a lot too. But I learned something important. Sometimes the people who look the scariest on the outside have the biggest hearts on the inside. Carlos glanced around at the tattooed bikers serving food and playing games with children. Slowly, his posture began to relax. Tank approached with a group of kids following him like he was the Pied Piper. Hey, Carlos, want to see something cool? I've got a fire truck parked outside. As the boy's eyes lit up and he ran off with the others, Maya smiled up at Marcus. Think he'll be okay? Marcus watched Carlos laugh as Tank let him wear a real firefighter's helmet, surrounded by people who had once been society's outcasts but had chosen to become its protectors instead. Yeah, he said, pulling Maya close. I think we all will be.